පෑස් චූටි පැක් රුපියල් 37ක වාසියක් දැන් රුපියල් 145යි.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 26th of January 2023. Intermediaries. Japanese Vice Minister of Finance says Japan is coordinating with the Paris Club and IMF to ensure the participation of China and India to restructure Sri Lankan debt. Disappointment. TN expresses disappointment over the delay in solving the Tamil national problem. Living within our means. President Ranil Wickremesinghe instructs all officials to reduce expenses that would have to be incurred for the 75th Independence Day celebrations. Long-term strategy. Sri Lankan corporate leader Ranjit Page says that the government should bring about a strategic act.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. From Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. Now, the Japanese Vice Minister of Finance for International Affairs, Masato Kanda, says Japan is coordinating with the Paris Club and the IMF to ensure the participation of China and India in efforts to restructure Sri Lanka's debt. The comments of the Japanese Vice Minister of Finance came after non-Paris Club members, China and India, both assured to provide Sri Lanka with debt relief in order to strengthen debt restructuring efforts. During an interview with Reuters, Vice Minister of Finance for International Affairs of Japan, Masato Kanda, said they're working hard to help Sri Lanka by coordinating with the Paris Club of Creditor Nations and the International Monetary Fund to ensure the participation of China and India in efforts to restructure its debt. The Japanese Vice Minister said it is desirable to work with these non-Paris Club countries in the same way, with a common framework referring to a group of 20 mechanism designated to provide a swift and comprehensive debt restructuring for nations facing difficulty meeting debt obligations after the COVID shock to their economies. Kanda also said if this is realized, it would pave the way to carry out debt restructuring for other middle-income countries. In September last year, the Japanese Finance Minister Sunichi Suzuki told the media that he urged Sri Lanka to provide necessary information, make efforts to make China, India and other creditors involved, and boost transparency on restructuring Sri Lankan debt. Finance Minister Suzuki went on to say that Japan will do its part if such preconditions are met. Now, IMF Executive Director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam told Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena that almost all the requirements for the IMF relief package for Sri Lanka have been completed and the process would be finalized once final assurances from the major lending countries is completed. Meanwhile, State Minister of Finance Ranjit Malapitiya, who held discussion with the IMF Executive Director Dr. Subramaniam, said he is hopeful that Sri Lanka will receive the first tranche of the EFF facility from the IMF soon, following the discussion with the IMF delegation. IMF Executive Director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who is currently in Sri Lanka for a visit, called on Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena at the Prime Minister's office in Colombo today. During the meeting, the IMF Executive Director appreciated the political will displayed by the Sri Lankan leadership to speed up reforms and implement difficult tax increases in order to revive the economy. Dr. Subramaniam said almost all the requirements for the IMF relief package for Sri Lanka have been completed, and the moment the final assurances from the major lending countries is completed, the process would be finalized. The Prime Minister briefed the IMF delegation about the steps taken by the government to face the unprecedented economic challenges faced by the country and to enhance agricultural produce to meet the local demand and also for export. While elaborating the measures taken to reduce non-essential imports and increase export productions, the Premier stressed the need for welfare for the poorest segments of the society. Dr. Subramaniam said a safety net for economically vulnerable groups is an essential requirement when plans are formulated to restructure debts and revive the economy and emphasize that the public sector should be ready to make sacrifices as they are the least assured of salaries, while many others have lost their avenues of income. Meanwhile, IMF Executive Director Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam met State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya this afternoon. During the meeting, the State Minister of Finance said he is hopeful that Sri Lanka will receive the first tranche of the IMF Extended Fund Facility soon, following a discussion with an IMF delegation. The meeting with the IMF Executive Director also focused at length on the issues faced by the public of Sri Lanka and the concerns surrounding state revenue. While discussions were also focusing on the technical issues in relation to obtaining loans, the IMF Executive Director assured that the island nation is entitled to financial facilities made available by the IMF. A parliamentarian of the Sri Lanka Podujana Perumuna Rear Admiral Dr. Sarath Weerasekara says the country will be divided if the 13th Amendment is empowered by President Ranil Wickremesinghe. He made these comments addressing media following the all-party conference held in Colombo today. Meanwhile, Ilankai Tamil Arasu Katchi MP M.A. Sumanthiran said they expressed their disappointment at the all-party conference over the delay in solving their issues, adding that the promise of the president was to solve them before the 4th of February.
An all-party conference was held at the Presidential Secretariat this evening under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The purpose of this conference is to arrive at a consensus and strengthen national harmony. The President's media unit said the meeting was open to Speaker of Parliament Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena, Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, Opposition Leader Sajith Premadasa, former Presidents Mahinda Rajapaksa and Maithripala Sirisena, TNA Leader R. Sambandhan, and Leader of National People's Power Anura Kumara Disanayaka.
ධාතුන්ගනි සංශෝධනය සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම සම්බන්ධයෙන් තමයි එතුමා අදහස් දැක්ුවේ. ඉතින් අපේ අදහස නම් එතුමා ගෝඨාභය ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ ජනවරම වෙනුවෙන් ඒකේ ඉතිරි කාලයට පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් තීරීපත් වෙච්ච ජනාධිපතිවරයා හැටියට එතුමාට එතුමාගේ අදහස් දරන්න අයිතිය තියෙනවා. හැබැයි එහෙමනම් එතුමා මේ රටේ අලුතෙන් ජනවරමක් ලබා ගත යුතුයි කියලා. මොකද ගෝඨාභය ජනාධිපතිතුමාව අපි දිනෙව්වේ 13 සංශෝධනයේ පූර්ණ වශයෙන් ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න නෙවෙයි 13 ඉවත් වෙන අලුත් ව්‍යවස්ථාවක් වෙනුවෙන්. 13 ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න එක එක්කෙනාගේ යෝජනා ගත්තා. ඒ නිසා මම හිතන්නේ වැඩි කල් යන්නේ මොකක් හරි ක්‍රියාත්මකයක් සිද්ධ වෙයි. මේ වෙලාවේ මේක බෙදුවොත් එimhe අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම රට බෙදෙනවා. ඉතින් එතුමාත් ඉතිහාසගත වෙයි. අපි කෙසේවත් 13 වෙනි සංශෝධනයේ ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න ඉඩ නොදිය යුතුයි කියන සාවරය තමයි
ජනාධිපතිතුමා කාලයක් නිකුත් කරලා තිබුණා. පෙබ්‍රවාරි 4 වෙනිදාට කලින් සියලු ප්‍රශ්න විසඳනා ගන්නවා කියලා. හැබැයි තාම මොනවත් ඉටු කරලා නැහැ. ඒක ගැන අපේ කනගාටුව අපි ප්‍රකාශ කරා. එනමුත් ජනාධිපතිතුමා කියන්නේ මේ සියලු දේවල් ඉදිරි කාලයේදී කරන්නවමයි කියලා කියනවා. 13 වෙනි සංශෝධනය නීති පොතේ තියෙන නිසා ඒක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න ඕනේ වගකීම් විධායක ධූරයේ පවත්වන තමන්ට ඒක තියෙනවා කියලා. ඒ නිසා ඒක කරනවා කියලා කිව්වා. ඒ වගේම ඊඩම් නිදහස් කරන්න ඒ ක්‍රියාවලිය සම්බන්ධව අපිට විස්තරව පැහැදිලි කරා.
Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe instructed all authorities to minimize expenses incurred within ministries when celebrating the 75th independence anniversary without burdening the treasury. The head of state made these remarks while speaking at a pre-discussion held at the Presidential Secretariat this morning.
දාලා තියෙන සමහර ඉස්තුමෙන්තු ගැන මම පුදුම වුණා. DSN නායක මැතිතුමාට මල් මාලා දාන්න රුපියල් 97000යි. දැන් අපි එක්සත් ජාතික පක්ෂයෙන් මේක කරද්දී අපි වියදම් කරේ මල් මාල වලට විතරයි. ඔව් ඒ නගර සභාව ඒක දුන්නේ. ඉතින් මම දන්නේ නැහැ කොහොමද මේක 97000 වුනේ. ජාතික ගීය ගයන්න ඉල්ලා තිබුණා 18,00,000ක්. අපි න ඉස්සර කරේ මම ඉතියද්දි මේ බස් වලට ගෙව්වා. ආහාර ටිකක් දුන්නේ ආවේ ළමයින්ට. මේවා එක එක අය දානකොට ආපහු බලන්න ඕනේ ලේකම්තුමා අපි කොහොමද මේකෙන් කරන්න කියලා. දැන් මම හොඳ උදාහරණයක් කියන්නම්. සෞන්දර්ය විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයෙන් ඒ අය විශාල සංදර්ශනයක් තියෙනවා. ඒකට උවමනා මුදල් ඒගොල්ලොම හොයාගන්න යනවා. අපි දෙන්නේ නෙළුම් පොකුණ නොමිලේ දෙන එක විතරයි. එහෙම අපි වැඩ කටයුතු කරනවා. අනික් මේවටත් පුළුවන් තරම් වෙනත් තෑගි හේම නැත්තම් පිටින් ආධාර ලබා ගන්න කියලා. අර තරුණේවට අපි සමහර ඒවාට මුදල් දෙන්නම් සමහර ඒවාට අපිට සිදු වෙනවා පිටින් තෑගි හොයාගන්න. ඒ දෙකම කරන්න පුළුවන් ඒ යෞවන වේදිකාවේ වැඩ කටයුතු වලට. ඊට අමතරව මම බැලුවේ ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් අපි මුදල් වෙන් කරන්න තියෙන්නේ එකක් නාගරික වනාන්තර වලට. මේ සැරේ ඩුබායි COP28 යන්ට ඉස්සෙල්ලායි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ මේක ආරම්භ කරලා යන්න. ඉතින් සම්පූර්ණ මුදල මේ සැරේ වුමනා නැහැ. කොහොමත් ඒකට මම හිතන්නේ මිලියන 50ක් 100ක් විතර වෙන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ අනුව ඒකයි අපේ විශේෂයෙන්ම අලුත් නීති ටික සම්මත කරලා ගෙනියන්න ඉන්නේ මේ මුදල් තියෙනවා. අනික තියෙන්නේ අපි ආරම්භ කරන අලුත් ආයතන. ඒවැ නීති ඔක්කොම සම්මත කරගන්නකොට ජූනි ජූලි අගෝස්තුවේ මේ අවුරුද්දේ එච්චර වියදමක් නැහැ ආරම්භ කරන්න. ඊළඟ අවුරුදු 3-4 තුරදී බිලියන 10ක් විතර ඒවට වියදම් කරන්නට සිදු වෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව අපි වෙනම මුදල් හොයාගන්න ඉන්නේ විශේෂයෙන්ම දේශගුණ විපර්යාස විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට. ඒ දීර්ඝ කාලින රටට සිදු වෙනවා. මේවා බොහෝ දුරට මම හිතන්නේ ලේකම්වරු දෙන්නත් භාණ්ඩාගාරයට සාකච්ඡා කළා. Tamanට තියෙන මුදල් වලින් ඒවා කරගෙන යන්න. කොහොමවත් දැනට මුදල් දෙන්න භාණ්ඩාගාරේ නැහැ. ප්‍රධාන එකට දීලා අපි බලමු භාණ්ඩාගාරේ කතා කරන්න. මොකද මිනිස්සුත් අපිට දොස් කියනවා විශේෂයෙන්ම විශාල මුදලක් වියදම් කරනවා නේද. අපේ තියෙන මුදල් තුලින් කරනවා නම් ඒක ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඉතින් මම හිතන්නේ මේ දෙක මේ ලේකම්වරු දෙන්න එක්ක ඔයගොල්ලෝ සාකච්ඡා කළා ඒ කාරණා දිහා බලන්න. නැත්තම් මේ තියෙන වැඩසටහන නම් හොඳයි. මම හිතන්නේ ඔය නිලධාරීන් හදන අවස්ථාවවලදී එස්තමේන්තු දිහා බලන්න ඕනේ. මේ උත්සවයේ තියන්න ඕනේ. අපේ 75 වෙනි සංවත්සරය. අපි ඒක නොකරනවා නම් රටට හොඳ නෑ. දෙවනුව අපි මේක නෙකරුවොත් ලෝකේ කියයි අපිට මේක කරන්නත් සල්ලි නැති වුණා කියලා. අපිට ආයෝජකයන් ගන්න තියෙනවා, අපිට සංචාරකයෝ ගේන්න තියෙනවා. ඉතින් මේවට අපි දෙන්න ඕනේ හරි මේකක් අපි පෙන්වන්න ඕනේ. එහෙනම් වියදම් බොහෝ දුරට සීමා කළා අපි 75 වෙනි සංවත්සරේ කරමු.
Now, the Commonwealth Secretary General Patricia Scotland is scheduled to arrive in Sri Lanka next week for a 5-day visit. According to the Commonwealth Secretariat, Scotland will be arriving on an invitation extended by President Ranil Wickremesinghe and will attend the 75th Islands Independence Day celebrations on the 4th of February. During her stay, Scotland is expected to engage in discussions with top state officials, including President Wickremesinghe. The Commonwealth chief will be in Sri Lanka from the 1st of February until the 5th of February. Now stay with us to find out what corporate business leaders think the government should do in order to protect investors and all those part of the supply chain until the customers.
It's hard to keep up with the new when you're listening to the same old Slim Bread Week. A week for professionals.
Welcome back. Now, Sri Lankan corporate leader Ranjit Page believes that the government should introduce a strategic act aiming to protect investors, producers and other stakeholders in the supply chain all the way to the consumer. Speaking to Indivari Amwatha at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, he said that the government needs to have a policy framework to bring about the necessary changes.
How do you think as an industry you can get together? What intervention should government or other authorities make to enable affordable food prices to the general public when we're talking about inflation and difficulties in managing your everyday lives?
I think the government needs to recognize the local food industry. The government needs to have certain strategic acts in parliament so that the consumer, not the consumer, the producer, the farmer is protected on one side, and the investor on the other side knows, okay, I can put, these are large investments, and they are also protected. I'm not talking of tax-free or anything. It's just to protect that this is a strategic act. This is the need of the country. The country needs to be developed in food production. The country has a population of 22 million and 30 or 40% is dependent on agriculture. Now, how do we build their livelihoods? In order to do that, the government needs to have the policy framework, and it should be an act of parliament to encourage on food security and nutrition. Because I don't think there is a thing as food security or cost of nutrition. Today, prices are, we blame it on everyone else and increase prices.
You speak of a strategic act, Mr. Page. What fundamentals would you like such an act to address, and what challenges in the industry would you want the government to look at and respond to immediately as we speak about food insecurity, whether it's the FAO, UN or World Bank? They warn of food insecurity.
Governments come and go, okay? And in Sri Lanka, the most spoken about before, not just now, but past, is about cost of living, and it's about the farmer. So when you talk about cost of living, they find probably, oh, suddenly there is excess production in a particular country, and they find, okay, let's import that and give it to the consumer. Oh, well, that's important. I'm not saying no. But then who is going to invest in infrastructure? Who is the farmer who is going to produce if there is such a sort of a opportunity for importers to bring, or the state to bring, and start killing the producer. So I'm not saying they need to create in terms of, okay, in terms there is a surplus worldwide. They need to also think how we're going to protect this producer. Yes, we'll bring it, but we also give him some incentive to keep producing or buy their production. We take the rice situation. We have imported rice and we're going to have a very good harvest. I mean, those rice mills, those producers have done good. But now, the imported rice which we are gifted, what are we doing with it? So nobody gains out of it. There needs to be some planning. They have to demand plan, not to just look, okay, one day you get up in the morning and you decide you want to do this. It has to be structured that certain elements, certain departments, certain ministries are able to write it down and say, okay, we need to work within this policy framework. I know of this in a neighboring country, that there is an act to protect the dairy industry. So it's an act of parliament. So we can look at what they've done and see. I'm not saying they're doing everything right, but they are the largest producer of milk in the world.
The Sri Lankan shares fell today as profit-taking entered the market mainly on financial and diversified sectors. The all share price index fell 0.13% to close at 8,926.56. The S&P SL20 index fell 0.33% to 2,798. The market turnover, meanwhile, was 1.2 billion rupees, lower than the month's daily average of 1.9 billion rupees. Expo Lanka dragging the market down closed 2.36%, down at 186 rupees and 7 cents a share. Sampath Bank fell 1.41% to close at 42 rupees a share, while Royal Ceramics Lanka closed 2.59%, down at 30 rupees and 1 cent a share. Insurance sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while energy sector was the second highest contributor. The net foreign inflow in the meantime of the Colombo stock market for the day was 31 million rupees. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee fared against other major currencies in the world. The oil prices rose on expectations of higher oil demands following the reopening of the Chinese economy, which is the largest oil importer in the world.
Oil prices rose 1% today on expectations that demand will strengthen as top oil importer China reopens its economy and on news that US crude inventories have risen less than expected. Brent crude futures rose 78 cents to $86.90 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up 75 cents at $80.90. China has been easing stringent COVID-19 restrictions this month, with Beijing reopening its borders for the first time in 3 years. The Energy Information Administration meanwhile said the US crude inventories edged up by 553,000 barrels to 448.5 million barrels in the week ending from 20th of January. That was short of forecast for a 1 million barrel rise, though the EIA says crude stocks are at their highest since June 2021. It is reported that the OPEC Plus ministerial panel meeting on February 1 is likely to endorse the oil producers group's current output levels.
The major Asian stock markets closed mixed today amid the expectations of a less aggressive US monetary tightening and a swift reopening in China. The Asia Dow, which includes blue chip companies in the region, increased by 0.33% for a reading of 3,555.37 points. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 fell 0.12% to close at 27,362.75 points, snapping a 4-day winning streak. The Hang Seng, the benchmark for blue chip stocks trading on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, surged 2.37% to 22,566.78 points, its highest close since last March. Singapore's, meanwhile, manufacturing output decreased by 3.1% year-on-year in December 2022 after an upwardly revised of 3.8% drop in November. Due to the Lunar New Year holidays, indexes are closed in China throughout the week. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Tune into our social media pages for the latest news. A pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.